channel. You know, here at Team Retro, there's really one thing that I want for Christmas, and that is a Game Boy Advance. I've missed mine from when I was a child, and I really just wanted to round out my collection. And you know what? I think I'm gonna get one this year, because I've been a very, very good YouTuber. We doubled our community, I helped out a ton of people with my Retro Pocket 5 review, and I got to go to California to get a sneak peek at the MSI Claw. You know, I've been a very good boy this year.
Wait. You think you've been good this year?
What are you doing?
Oh, I don't own any pancake mix, or a skillet, or an oven, but you do, and it's the holidays and all that justification. Anyways, did I hear you say you've been good this year?
Well, yeah, I have been.
Based on what exactly?
My viewers, my community, my videos.
None of that matters. None of it.
What do you mean?
None of it matters.
Why not?
You seem to be forgetting something very, very important.
What are you talking about?
Ooh, how easily we forget. Allow me to remind you.
Can't sugarcoat it. This is the worst D-pad I have ever tested on a handheld. In addition to the fact that it just doesn't feel that good, it registers accidental inputs like you wouldn't believe.
But I was just being honest.
Yeah, that was your first mistake.
But that's my job.
It is. But it was mean.
These rules seem arbitrary and unfair.
They in fact are. That's how we keep children in line for the holiday season.
So no Game Boy?
No Game Boy, no.
Why not?
Well, I could go into the detailed rules of Christmas and how the naughty versus the nice and all that, but it's just a lot easier to say, nope, you were bad, based on that one video. But don't worry, being your best friend and all, I got you a little something.
No, not another.
Anbernic!
Not again!
That's right, buddy. Let me go ahead and reward you. Merry Christmas. Here is your Anbernic.
It's a Game Boy Advance!
Wait, what? No, it's not.
It's a Game Boy Advance!
No.
But it looks like a Game Boy Advance!
It does look like
It plays Game Boy Advance games!
Yeah, it does that, but...
This is amazing! This is great! This is what I wanted! Thank you! I'm gonna go play!
What? No, stop. You're missing the point of all this!
At time of recording, the Emmernic RG34XX can be pre-ordered direct from Emmernic's website for about $70 with a $6 discount for the first couple of days. The unit I am using in this video is an Indigo unit provided by Anbernic for the purposes of this review. As is always required, all opinions are my own, I'm not being paid, and they are not seeing this video before it is published. It's time to hop on our mount and ride into Spec Town. The Anbernic RG34XX is powered by the same H700 quad-core ARM Cortex processor that we see in the entire XX line of handhelds released in 2024. The GPU is a dual-core G31 MP2. The device has 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM and storage via a dual microSD card slot system. The screen is a 3.4-inch IPS screen with OCA lamination, a 480p resolution, and a 3:2 aspect ratio. Giving the device life is a 3500 mAh battery. For connectivity, this handheld has Wi-Fi built in as well as Bluetooth 4.2. The device ships with Anbernic's Linux 64-bit operating system. I do like that Anbernic switched things up a bit with their packaging. They're going all in on the Game Boy Advanced influence. Inside the device is the handheld and something different, a wrist strap. Then there's the usual screen protector, manual, and USB-C cable. Alright, so now let's do our live device tour, and let's start by focusing on the top of the device where the shoulders and triggers are. And you can see here, this is a little bit of an odd shape here. We have a bit of a bulge here, but it doesn't seem to take away from the aesthetic of what the Game Boy Advance would be, because the Game Boy Advance would have had the cartridge slot here. So obviously these are digital triggers. They are not analog. They are just a 0-1 connection here, a 0-1 activation, and they're not bad. As a matter of fact, in order to do this device tour, I brought out my Game Boy Advance that I had recently modded with a funny playing backlit IPS screen as well as a USB-C charge port, and these are actually a lot clickier than these. So let's do a quick sound test here. This is the 34XX. And now let's do the Game Boy Advance. And you could see here, this is actually a lot clickier. This is a little bit mushier and less noisy. But of course, what you also have here is the addition of an L2 and an R2, and they are pretty oddly placed. It does kind of create as much of an illusion of stacked shoulder buttons as you can get, but these L2 and R2 are mostly meant to just be out of the way for hotkeys. You're not really going to be using L2 and R2 all that much on this device, except maybe to fast forward or rewind, or you can set these to save and load state if you want. But these are more just meant to be hotkeys. These are not meant to be actual buttons that you're going to use in everyday life. And even then, they're not that hard to reach back to. They just look a little bit funny. So let's take a look at the top of the device. You have your reset button, your USB-C charge port, mini HDMI out, and a menu button. And then back here, you have your triggers, and then you have the two SD card slots. And I kind of like that they put the SD card slots here because that would essentially fit where the GBA cart would go on an original GBA. And you have a lot of the same curvatures here. So this is actually really meant to emulate a Game Boy Advance as much as possible. And you could see here, even with the shoulder buttons, they've chosen shoulder buttons that are very similar here. If you even look on the back of the device, where you have your battery cover, like everything just kind of fits exactly like you would for Game Boy Advance. Even on the sides, they've emulated the plastic divider piece that is on a Game Boy Advance, and they even emulated, this is probably the exact same part, quite frankly, they even emulated where you can put the little hand wrist thingy that goes around here so that you can like put this on your wrist or you can wrap it around something. And I just found that to be a really cool addition. This is actually a pure nostalgia machine here. If we go ahead and take a look at the front of the device and compare that to a Game Boy Advance, you're going to see it is 1-to-1, almost exactly the same. You have a single speaker here on the right, you have start and select on the left, you have a D-pad, and then you have B and A right in the same spot as they would be on a Game Boy Advance, but then you also have the addition of an X and a Y button, and these kind of are meant to just blend in with the unit and get out of the way. Obviously, you're only going to be using these buttons for something like Super Nintendo, but in all honesty, in a system like this, if you're going to be using it to primarily emulate Game Boy Advance, then what I personally would do is I would just emulate the Game Boy Advance versions of SNES ports. But that's just me. That's just a me thought. But these are here. You can use them however you need to. Super Nintendo, hotkeys for RetroArch. And it is kind of nice that they did put that addition, but they kept these B and A buttons true to a Game Boy Advance. And we're going to get into why that's important a little bit later when we do some gameplay testing. And then on the bottom of the device, you have a power button, which is in the exact same spot you would find the power button on the Game Boy Advance. And you have a headphone jack in the exact same spot. And you have a volume wheel here. Now, this isn't an actual wheel, like this is an actual spinning wheel here on the Game Boy Advance unit. This is just a switch So this just, you have to keep going right if you want volume up, left if you want volume down. It's not a matter of continuing to spin it. It's actually more of a flicky button. That is the only change here from the full-on wheel of the actual Game Boy Advance. Now, one question that might come up with this device is whether or not it's worth picking this up over modding and reshelling a stock Game Boy Advance. It cost me about $200, and the 34XX is only about $70. Considering the 34XX can emulate much more than a Game Boy Advance, it seems to be a much more frugal decision. You also get a slightly bigger screen on the 34XX, meaning increased visual fidelity while still taking advantage of integer scaling. And design-wise, this device feels almost exactly like the GBA. Let's take the D-pad for instance. Functionally, this D-pad, for better or for worse, works just like the D-pad on a Game Boy Advance. Now, because this device is accurate to the GBA, I only loaded up portable game systems on it. So when I played Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival, I was able to pull off Ryu's fireballs and tornado kicks with a pretty high accuracy considering I'm naturally bad at fighting games. The 3x2 aspect ratio device lineup is actually not that prominent in the handheld scene, as most handhelds have a 4x3 aspect ratio. But there are a couple of other comparisons we can make other than just an original GBA. Let's rewind the clock back to 2020 when the Anbernic RG34XX was released. I bought this just before I started doing YouTube videos, and I've kept it ever since. It has an older chip, is more expensive than the 34XX for some reason, and has more of a candy bar style as opposed to the GBA inspired style of the 34XX. You also don't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth in the original 351P, and you have them both here in the 34XX. The screen between these two devices seems comparable, however. So if we want to up our price point and get a slightly higher resolution screen, there's another candy bar style 3x2 device called the Ion Neo Pocket Micro. Now this is a great deal more expensive considering what you get, coming in at about a $200 starting price. We're talking more than double the price for a more premium product with a higher resolution screen, so you would have to decide if you are comfortable paying that premium for Game Boy Advance emulation. In my opinion, if I knew that the 34XX were coming out in 2024, I probably would not have invested in the Pocket Micro. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on what we already know for gameplay. I've reviewed so many of these XX devices, and they all have the same chip and the same capabilities. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, I only loaded up portable systems onto this handheld because I feel that this is really the best use case for a 3x2 aspect ratio screen. Your best experience is going to be with Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advanced, and that boils down to the design and placement of the face buttons. In nearly every other handheld I've compared this device to, I've had to change the button mapping of the face buttons so that retro gameplay feels more comfortable, like when playing games on a Super Nintendo. In the 34XX, the X and Y buttons just get out of the way for content that relies on just an A and a B button, meaning that I could just get into the game and not waste time with changing button mapping. Because RetroArch is our back end, however, I could still change that mapping if I need to. Now, Game Boy shouldn't be the end-all and be-all of this system. I suggest you check out some of the other portable retro systems out there like the Sega Game Gear. PSP is also a worthwhile system to check out with some caveats. There is no joystick on this device, meaning some PSP games will not work unless you remap the joystick to the D-pad, like here in God of War. God of War also caps at about 28 frames per second at a 1x resolution, so I would not advise you play this game on the 34XX. Instead, I advise you to look for some lighter end PSP games that are more D-pad centric, and you could have a very good time playing those. Now let's wrap things up with my final thoughts. This device is definitely nostalgic. Do you have a GBA as a kid? Or do you want to pass on the awesomeness of the GBA to your kid? Now, you can finally do it without breaking the bank. This device looks exactly like a Game Boy Advance, granting you that nostalgia without having to pay for it. For me, this is one of Anbernic's best XX handhelds, purely because it allows me to experience that nostalgia but I could play other systems on it as well. This isn't just due to the design, but also due to the button placement, allowing me to just jump into a Game Boy game without having to remap the buttons. To me, that's really big because it's one less thing I have to worry about, and one less thing I have to navigate within RetroArch. This device, like the XX devices before it, will also benefit from custom firmware. Once newly MinUI and MuOS are available, this will allow for more device customization and a much better experience from the stock firmware that comes with the device. And I'm looking forward to getting native ports working on this handheld as well. Now, I have to tell you the honest truth. I am a massive Game Boy Advance stan. I played that system a ton in my college days, despite the original unit's shortcomings, such as the lack of a backlight on the screen. But I ultimately enjoy any chance I have to play GBA, so it was very hard for me to objectively find negatives. But there are some nonetheless, and one is the 3:2 aspect ratio screen. You're going to find that the screen is perfectly fine for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance because that screen ratio is just perfect for that content, and 16:9 content will equally be as good. However, you will need to perform some tricks to get 4:3 content like NES and SNES looking decent on this device to the point where you'll probably just gravitate towards the GBA ports of some SNES and SNES games. If a console experience is more your speed, you might be better served picking up one of the other XX handhelds, such as the Anbernic Cube XX or the 40XXV, and that kind of hurts this device. The large amount of XX devices does provide choice, but also makes it hard for someone to pick up this device over one of the other XX devices unless you really, really like Game Boy Advance. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a device you are considering, and what do you think is the best use case for a device like this? And please feel free to continue the conversation on the Retro Handhelds and Steam Machine Discords, where you can find me hanging out in between videos. And if you want to support the channel like these wonderful people on the screen, you can do so by going to my Patreon page. Links for all these places are in the description. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you in any way. Every smash of that button helps the channel grow and allows me to get more content out to you. But until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.